And so with a standard blade back in the table saw, we can now move on to cutting the miters into our tenons. So we just need to turn the blade to 45 degrees and then cut simple miters just on the ends of each of the tenons. And the reason for this is because our tenons interact within the leg stock itself. So there's two different options you have when you have overlapping tenons like we've got here. One option would be you could make one shorter and one longer. Whichever one you need more structurally sound, you can make the longer one so that it has more glue surface. But what we're doing here by mitering them is we're just making sure that both our front and our side tenons are going to have equally strong connections into this whole piece. So now it's time to start working with the walnuts. So we glued up these panels, one of the first things we did to make sure that we were ready for when we reach this point. We don't have to stop and start milling again and preparing panels. We can just go into working on these panels. So these are still rough to size. There's still lots of glue squeeze out. So what I need to do is I need to go over all of them with my crappy hand plane and just clean up some of that glue squeeze out. Then go through the planer and get them all down to their final 3/8 thickness. Then, once we have them down to that 3/8 thickness, we can start working on the actual sizing of them. Each of these panels is going to make up either one bottom section or 3 top section pieces. So this was a very intentional design because it's a number and a ratio that I personally really like. I like to stick to either 2:1 or 3:1. And so for these walnut panels, I'm not really going to stop and talk about what I'm doing for the process of them. We're just going to kind of batch them out, get them done nice and quick. Because I've talked about how to fit floating panels before on pretty much every build series I've done. The pie cupboard, the dresser, and the trunk, all 3 of those projects all had floating panels that all were fitted with the same cove profile that I'm going to be using on here. And so there's really nothing complex about these panels. They're just going to be fitted into the spaces we've created with all of our framing pieces, all of those dividers and stretchers and all that stuff. And then when they fit in, we'll be good to go. Yeah, this project is actually moving along really quickly. Alright, so I went ahead and put one of the cases together, and these things look absolutely amazing. I love the cove profile, the walnut panels mixed with the white oak. It's an awesome combination. Really like how this is coming together. And this is also a good time to mention that if this was a paid piece, somebody had commissioned me to build them a desk, I'd be doing this project a lot differently. So when I'm just building stuff either for videos or for fun, I tend to take it a lot more freeform and just kind of choose what I want to do when it comes up. So for this, I just chose that this is the stuff that I wanted to get done, and I didn't really need to start on the walnut panels just yet. I could have gone through and done the shelves and all that. Would probably have been a better order of operations, but the walnut panels are much more satisfying and enjoyable to do. Alright, so I've got a lot of little stuff to do to this case before I can glue it up that aren't really worth talking about. So I'm just going to talk about them here, and then we're just going to batch them out, get them done, and then move on. these birds this morning. Oh my goodness. So one of the big things we need to do is on our bottom and front stretchers, we just need to create a nice curved profile. Now again, nothing spectacular. We're just going to be going up 1/2 inch to create a little bit of lift right in the middle here. So it's not going to be a big curve, but it's going to be just enough to create a little bit of detail. And I'm going to be doing that all freehand with a drawing bow, as you guys will see in a little bit here. Then we have to go in and put in the half-blind dovetail support on the front side. So I'm just going to be cutting 2 half-blind dovetails on the front post and fitting up a piece to go in there. I also have to cut the reliefs in the top and bottom back stretchers, which will then hold our back panels. So there's going to be 3/8 of an inch deep, so half the piece's thickness, and the same thing will be on the back panel. We'll then put a couple screws into the back panel to attach it to those pieces. The whole purpose of this is that the back panel is easy to remove, especially on this one, which is going to be the case that holds my computer. I want to make sure that back panel can be taken off easily. And so then the last thing is going to be adding in our base support pieces. So these are just going to be 1 inch wide strips that are going to be going into those dados that we cut into all of our bottom stretchers. So they're going to be on all 4 sides. They're just going to cut a nice simple rabbet onto all of these pieces, glue them in, and they'll be fixed in place. That way then when I want to put in the base panel, I can just drop it right in. And so then one thing I also forgot, we're going to be putting 2 mortises into our back legs of the inside facing legs, the areas you're not going to see, because these are what's going to support our back panel, or floating back support, brace, whatever you want to call it. That's what it is.
I burned out like a wandering ember. I shone bright, then my journey was over. What I sought when I ran was back where I began. No matter the rain, no matter the storm, I'm coming home. I'm coming home. We've opened the gate. Don't turn off the light. I'm coming I gained all that I need for a fight. In the end, what I found was nowhere near. No matter the rain, no matter the storm, I'm coming home. I'm coming home. We've opened the gate. Don't turn off the light. I'm coming home. Though I fought with my claws and teeth, though I elbowed my way to a sea, there be no kind of peace like you beside me. No matter the rain, no matter the storm, I'm coming home. I'm coming home. We've opened the gate. Don't turn off the light. I'm coming home. I'm coming home. Nothing's as it seems. Oh, nothing is as sweet going so long. Nowhere I can ramble or roam. Could change my mind. Could slow my coming.
Alright, so since the last talking clip, I've made a few fundamental decision changes to this whole project. So one of the things I said I was going to do was I was going to put in the half-blind dovetail cross pieces in all these areas, the ones on the top here and this middle one. But I'm rethinking what I'm going to do here because I've decided on the top sides of here These two top stretchers are not necessary whatsoever. And so on the left side here, we've got the bottom and the higher up one that's going to be the drawer support. Those two are going to be plenty enough to tie that whole thing together. On the right side here, we have plenty of stretchers going across. There's 4 going across total. It's going to be more than stable enough. And so the real benefit here is that I get to add an extra 3/4 of an inch to both of these drawers in height. The drawer on this side was already fairly small. I think it was about a 2-inch, I think it's about a 2-inch tall drawer. Now it'll be 2 3/4. So that extra 3/4 of an inch is actually going to be very useful because it's not just dead space on the top of both of these areas. We actually are going to have an extra 3/4 of an inch tall of a drawer for storage space, which is always a benefit. And so for this front stretcher, I'm trying to decide on the best way to do it, because if I do it that way I was planning on with the half blind dovetail, it's going to end up notching out these 2 pieces pretty big. We're going to have, probably at least 1/4 to 1/2 an inch notch on the top of both these tenons. And on a 1-inch tenon, that's a lot of space you're giving up. So what I want to try and do here is figure out a way to attach this piece to these 2 posts without bringing it down any more than I need to, because it's already pretty close to my knees as it is. And I want to make sure that it's nice and solidly in place. So there's going to be a little bit of figuring out to do here. I'm still deciding whether or not I actually need this piece in here, because I'm also going to be using the desktop itself to tie this whole thing together. We're going to be putting figure 8 fasteners on all these top stretchers and actually fastening these bases to that tabletop so we have a nice firm foundation to it. The other change that I'm going to be making is the way that we're actually going to be mounting the drawers in here. So initially I'd planned to actually build multiple frames for each of the levels and then cut dados into all of our little vertical divider pieces that would then support the drawers. And so you can see here just why that idea is not really going to work. So if I was going to put dados through all these pieces, I'd have to make sure that that dado lines up perfectly across all these pieces. Now, as we know, there's a decent amount of variance in these pieces, both vertically and side to side, to make sure that those line up and to give us a little bit of freedom of movement. And so the big problem with the dados is that there's a big chance that they don't line up perfectly when you get everything together and all glued up. And so what I'm going to do instead is I'm just going to take a nice straight piece across and I'm going to build a little bit of an L shape to it, because because of the distance between our legs and the inside of these stretchers here, we have to make sure we fill up that distance. And then all I'm going to do is I'm just going to screw them to these mounting points. And that's going to be a much stronger and much more versatile way of mounting this thing. Again, this makes it replaceable in the future, so if those drawer slides start wearing down and get a little bit too thin or just uneven, I can always take them out and replace them. And they'll be much easier to install than trying to fit a floating frame into that area and trying to get it into those dados. So now we have all of the holes drilled into both our post legs and all of our horizontal stretchers, we can now start transferring those marks onto the actual tenons and then drilling those holes. That way everything will get pulled together exactly how we want in the final setup. So what I've gone through and done here is on every single mortise I cut, I put in a dowel hole. So on all of our horizontal dividers, they're 1/4 of an inch back, and then centered on each of the tenons. And then on our post legs, everything that's a 1.5 inch piece, I put it in a single dowel, then centered it on the tenons, just like on all of our horizontal stuff. Then on our wider bottom pieces, I made sure to put in 2 dowels just for a little bit of visual balance. So on all of the legs, I'm going to be using walnut dowels just because that'll create some nice contrast. And then for all the dowels going into the middle section, we're going to use white oak dowels, that way they blend a little bit better. So now the trick with transferring the dowel holes onto the tenons is to make sure that everything is in its final position. And so with this all set up, it's fairly easy. All you're going to do is take your brad point bit, and you want to make sure that you're using a brad point bit for this because a normal drill bit is not going to work. You need to have that little point on there, and it's really helpful if it's an exact match. If it's the same bit you're planning on using or the same bit you use to drill all these holes out, that's way better because you know that it's going to be a precision fit into each of these holes. Then once it's nice and Alright, and so that's what our side is going to look like when it's all done. Now, obviously I haven't put these dowels all the way through because that would pretty much lock most of these in place. We're not doing any kind of draw boring on here, the dowels are just going straight through, but they would also pull, there would be enough resistance between the dowels themselves and the wood that I'd probably have to drill them out. So they're just barely in there, and that's why we still have some pieces like this that still have some wiggle to them.